Welcome to the presentation for the new CPSA module API. I'm here together with Erik Wilde and Thilo Frotscher. You are the curators for the Advanced Module API. Which core themes and skills did you decide to emphasize in the curriculum and why?
Well, first of all, term API has been used for many different things over time. So we start with looking at the history of APIs, where APIs have been used and what they look like, what technologies have been used, ending up with what's typically meant with APIs when we talk APIs today, which is typically HTTP-based APIs. And after that, we're looking at different integration technologies, different integration styles, followed by good practices of API design, API description languages, with the obvious example, OpenAPI. And also we are looking at tools and last but not least at potential security issues that we have to be aware of when designing and providing APIs.
I think I would like to add one thing, which is my heart really beats for API landscapes. So not just single APIs, but in large organizations, you often have hundreds or thousands or sometimes tens of thousands of APIs. And that adds like new problems to the whole management of those. So we also have one part where we talk about governance and these kind of things, where it's not just about individual APIs, but what does it take to manage APIs at a large scale in really large organizations.
What are the success factors for APIs and are they addressed in the curriculum?
Yeah, of course, we try to. I think we managed to do that. So we start with business aspects as well, because I think in many cases a problem with APIs is that people look at them as pure technical artifacts, which of course they are, but they're not just technical. So one of the success factors is to also make sure that you have APIs that reflect what your business does. So that, for example, when you're coming up with new ideas, what to implement, what applications to write, what AI things to explore, that you can actually work with capabilities that are meaningful for your business, right? And in many organizations, API are pretty low level. So one of the success factors is definitely to make sure that you have things that are well aligned with your business and not just like, here's a database, good luck with that, right? But then also, once you have that business aspect or the business alignment, then the question is also one of design, right? Then it needs to be a well-designed API. Once you have identified which API it is you want to build, which is why we have design in there. And then there's also this whole idea of helping people with tooling so that they can more easily consume APIs. So some people, for example, want to give consumers of APIs SDKs, software development kits, so that developers have an easier time to use APIs. That is kind of a matter of taste. Sometimes people do it, sometimes they don't, but that can also be important. And then one aspect that's also important, I think, is if you are a large organization, as I mentioned, you probably have hundreds or thousands of APIs, and then it also becomes important that the individual APIs that you're building have a certain look and feel to them, right? So that if you have 1,000 APIs, that once you have seen 10 or 20 of them, and then you see one more, it kind of looks similar, right? It has a similar look and feel. So this kind of governance and design guidelines also makes it much easier, in particular in large organizations, that people can get used to how APIs typically work. You can use certain tooling that adapts to that style. And that is why we have this whole kind of broad range going from business to design to tooling and then in the end to governance, because we think for successful adoption of APIs, you really need to look at that really big picture.
Thilo, I have a next question for you. Who can benefit from this training and to whom would you recommend it?
Well, obviously software architects, as this is a module as part of a certification for software architecture, but also software developers. It's just important, I think, to emphasize that this module does not delve too deeply into technology or like particular protocols. We're looking at APIs from a higher level, from a bigger picture, how APIs fit into architectures, for example, and the business aspects of APIs. And this is why I think the module is also a very good fit for business people, project managers and the like, if they want to get a better idea of why we need APIs, where they can be used and how businesses can benefit from using APIs internally as well as from public APIs, of course.
Okay, thank you. And Erik, for you the next question. How do you design APIs so that they can easily used by AI agents?
Like a really interesting question, right? Because I think to some extent, some people say it doesn't matter, right? APIs are designed to be used by machines, right? Basically, so AI is just another machine. And that to some extent is true. But on the other hand, it's a special kind of machine, right? Because typically your API is getting consumed by a developer, and developers have certain knowledge in their heads. They can adapt to, for example, documentation that isn't great. They can figure out things, they can ask people, right? So developers, I would say, are a little bit more tolerant in tolerating not the best design and not the best documentation. And for AI, this goes away, right? AI is very simple-minded, right? It has a certain world model and it understands things according to that world model, and you need to feed that model. So to some extent, you need to follow all the guidelines that you would follow for regular developers, what people often call developer experience. And now there's a new term that people are using, which is agent experience, meaning that it's kind of the same kind of thing. How does it feel to use that API, but for AI users? There's a much bigger focus there on having good descriptions so that you can more easily understand what the API actually does. Having descriptions that actually work by itself and not require a bigger context you have to have in mind, right? Because oftentimes then people, for example, might take an API and just map it, for example, through something like MCP and make it available to AI, right? And in that case, it helps a lot if your description is really self-contained. So that's a lot of, I would say, considerations that you have to go through to make things really self-contained and descriptive. And then also, oftentimes it helps that you have kind of more coarse-grained APIs. So instead of having many different endpoints where an agent would need to figure out how to use those 20 endpoints, have one API that does all of that and only expose that API to an agent. So have a little bit coarser-grained APIs that also can help, because as we all know, if you give AI too many things, it becomes overwhelmed, right? Like its context window fills up, it has a hard time figuring out what all of that means. So by following these guidelines, having better descriptions, trying to reduce the number of things that you give to your AI, you have a pretty good starting point, I would say, to have AI working more successfully with your APIs.
So my last question to you, how do you spend your time in the training? What's the format and how is the look and feel of the training?
Well, of course, there's parts where we present material, as you would expect in a training course, but at the same time we spend a lot of time with practical exercises, not programming exercises, but more conceptual exercises. And what we also do is that we're trying to give a lot of room for attendees to share their experiences, to talk about the challenges they've faced, how they've solved them. And as this is a new module, it's only taken place a couple of times so far, but the feedback that we got was that attendees very much liked this opportunity to talk to other attendees and share these experiences, and that they thought that this was very valuable for their day-to-day project work.
It's also great to be the trainer, because the more you spend time in the exercise, you also always hear like new stories, things that you haven't heard before. So it's all, for me so far, really every time I also went away with things that I learned during the trainings. And it's really, I think it's a good mix of presentations and practical exercises, which seem to work well for the attendees we have had so far.
Erik and Thilo, thank you for this interview and these many insights.
Thanks for having us, that was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this interview, and if you need more information, look at our website iSAQB.org. Thank you.